Have you ever asked the question, what's the point? Why am I here? Why am I working so hard when things don't work out? If you have ever pondered this question, which I ponder all the time, if you've been following me for 5 seconds on social media, you know that I often revert to this posture of hands in the air, frustration. What's the point? Why did I even try? I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation today on the Possibility Mom. I have Dr. Jordan Grumet, aka Doc G, to talk about his brand new book. We are going to be unpacking what it looks like to live a life of purpose, meaning, and legacy. That's what's coming up today on the Possibility Mom Live. First of all, Happy New Year. I hope you've all had a wonderful, wonderful time. It's, what day is it today? January 9th. I feel like I'm still easing in to the new year. I intentionally this year kept it kind of quiet in the sense that in years past, I've held like a strategic planning workshop, or I've myself gone off and done some planning and some visioning for the new year. This year, I'm just going to be really honest. I have been in a period, like the last couple of days, especially, I've been in a period of deep contemplation. The book that we're going to unpack today has been a part of that contemplation. Another book on removing myself from social media and the relationship that I have with my phone has also played an influence on that. But I also think that I'm coming out of 2 years of great adventure. We lived in 10 homes in 10 months when I was pregnant with baby number 10. We are welcoming another baby. It's been a season of a lot of conversations with the Lord where I have asked the question, what's the point? Why have you not found us a house, Lord? Why have we encountered and endured so much suffering? Where have you been in the suffering? So it's been an interesting season. I've shared so much of that journey here with you all, and you all have been so incredibly supportive. I'm very grateful. But of course, especially in trial, I'm sure, let me know in the comments if you're watching this live, if you know the feeling when you're in a time of trial, you're like, what is the point of this? I think as human beings, we might have a need to, I know I do, figure things out. I really like knowing exactly why something is happening. And I've had to learn how to be a little bit detached from that need. And so when I stumbled upon this book, and it's such a fun story, how I got to know Doc G, he's got a brand new book, and it is called The Purpose Code: How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy. Of course, I was intrigued. Doc G's work actually came across my desk from a client of mine, a dear client of mine. She forwarded me an interview he did on his previous book on money. And she was like, I really think you should share this perspective with anybody who is struggling with money. And I got hooked. I was so just fascinated. And then, here we are with his brand new book. But I want to begin this conversation on purpose. We are going to talk about purpose, but I want to share with you that the Catholic Church has already given us the answer. Okay, so this is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I'm sure many of you listening own this. And when you open this book, right at the very, very beginning, like literally in the prologue, we read, Father, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. God, our Savior, desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. There is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved than the name of Jesus. Further down the page, for this reason, at every time and in every place, God draws close to man. He calls man to seek him, to know him, to love him with all his strength. Many of you listening may also know this book. This is the Baltimore Catechism. So forgive me, I don't know when this book came out, but this is, I know, like my spiritual director, when he was trained, this is the book that he studied as a child. I feel like this was very prevalent in my parents' generation, where these truths of the Catholic Church were taught and children were encouraged to memorize. And so I want to just reference this in the conversation of purpose, because again, like I said, the church has given us the answer to this question. It literally says, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening, what I'm showing is the purpose of man's existence. This is page 11, the purpose of man's existence. So it has been spelled out for us. And it literally is, and I'm going to just pull up, as we follow Jesus, he wants us, his sheep, to love one another, to help one another, to be kind to one another. He wants us to serve God and worship God together. And later on the page, why did God make us? God made us to show forth his goodness and to share us with his everlasting happiness in heaven. What must we do to gain the happiness of heaven? To gain the happiness of heaven, we must know, love, and serve God in this world. Know, love, and serve God. So what's the purpose of life in the lens of Catholic Church teaching? To know, love, and serve God. But what the Catechism does not say, and this is where I've built a career coaching moms, and why I do think it is important that if you are a Catholic, that you keep these things in mind. It does not say in the Catholic Church, in the Catechism. And here is the exact prescription for how you're going to do this in your individual life, with your individual family, with your individual gifts and talents. That is where the adventure, the journey, the incredible time of exploration. Like, we're not lemmings. We're not like, and again, all the stuff I said about control and relenting of control, I can now see 2 years out from a very just adventurous time in my family's life, why some of those things occurred. Or perhaps more accurately, I can say the wisdom I have gained from a lot of upheaval, from a lot of suffering. I'm grateful for the suffering because of the wisdom earned. However, if I could fast forward the tape, you know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't be nearly, number one, as exciting, and I would not have to trust the Lord as much. And so the adventure that we are on of finding our purpose, of discovering who we're meant to be, what we're supposed to do with our gifts and talents, it's what many of you come to me for in coaching. It's what many of you have turned to my book, The Possibility Mom, for just, again, exploration and curiosity for. So I really hope you love this conversation, and I hope that it gives you a framework or a roadmap or more ideas for how we can do this in the lens of our what the Catechism has told us, our journey, our intimacy with the Lord, but how we love and serve and share him with others can and should look so unique to all. Okay, so without further delay, I'm so excited for this conversation. Welcome to the Possibility Mom podcast, Dr. Jordan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I love what you just said there, to know, serve, and love God. Yes, that sounds a lot like purpose, but the other side is, what does that look like in our everyday life? And I love that question, because I think we can look at this from both religious and non-religious perspectives, and it actually brings us to the same place. So I'm really excited that you kind of started with that question, because I think it's just so important.
It's an important point of distinction. Doc G, for anybody who might not know you and your work, would you kindly introduce yourself?
So, to make a long story short, when I was 7 years old, my father died suddenly. He was a doctor. I was 7, so I thought that everything happened because of me in this world, because 7-year-olds think that way. And so I somehow thought it was my fault. And the way I was going to cosmically make up for all this was I was going to become a doctor like him. And that's exactly what I did. Spent many, many years studying, became a doctor, and very quickly burnt out. Realized that this was maybe my father's dream, but not mine. And more importantly, becoming a doctor didn't fix cosmically the fact that he died, didn't give me any better answers. And at the time, I discovered the personal finance world. I said, well, if I don't want to be a doctor anymore, I need to have at least enough money to support myself so I can stop being a doctor. Started learning about money, realizing that I had been lucky to have great financial behavior modeled for me. and that I could probably step away from medicine. I didn't need to make as much money as I thought. And that left a big hole in my life because it was the only kind of purpose or identity I knew. And so I went down the rabbit hole of doing things I like to do, like public speaking and writing, eventually podcasting. I started subtracting out what I didn't like about my work life. I got rid of almost everything about being a doctor except hospice work. So I was spending time helping the terminally ill. And I did that for 5 or 10 hours a week. And I kept that piece, got rid of everything else. And I started talking a lot about personal finance, and I would do my podcast episodes and I'd have all these experts on and I'd ask them how to build money, how to create wealth. And they could tell me all of that. But then I'd ask, well, why are you doing this? And what does enough look like? And they would stare at me dumbfounded. And interestingly enough, I started to find those answers, not with my financial people, but actually with my dying patients who could look back on their life and say, I really regret that I didn't do these types of things different. And so I thought, what if I could bring that knowledge to my financial people and everybody, what the dying can teach us about money or life? That became my first book, Taking Stock, which of course I marketed. And a big point of that book was to say we should put purpose and identity first and then build a financial framework around that. And people came up to me afterwards and said, you keep on saying, find your purpose. I have no idea what my purpose is. It's stressing me out. Will you please stop telling me to find my purpose? So I did this deep dive into purpose, and I realized that there's a paradox. Purpose is associated with all sorts of great things like happiness, health, and longevity, but it also causes lots of stress and anxiety. So I wrote my second book, The Purpose Code, to help resolve that paradox.
I want to pause there for a minute because taking stock. So like I shared, I had a dear client of mine. I've been coaching her for like 5 years. It's wild. And we've become like friends. You know, it's such an interesting relationship. And she was the one who sent me an interview that you did on taking stock. It was from maybe a year or two ago. And I listened to that particular interview. It was in the lens of retirement. I'm not near retirement age, but I listened to this podcast you did probably 5 or 6 times. I did a whole reaction episode about it because it impacted me so much. So I'd love to spend just a few minutes talking about money, just briefly, because share with everybody what your experience is that people share at the end of their life. I encourage everybody to go read Taking Stock, but just briefly, what is it that they're reflecting on? What were the common themes that you saw, especially in relationship to regret and to money?
So when people are dying, we, the hospice team, first tries to make sure their symptoms are controlled, right? So they don't have pain and nausea. Then we try to make sure they are where they want to be. So if they want to die at home or whatever, we help set that up. But one of the things we also do is something called the Hospice Life Review. It's a series of structured questions. It can be done by a social worker, a nurse, or a doctor, pretty much anyone involved in hospice. And it's where we ask these deep questions about someone's life. What were their regrets? What were their biggest successes? What were their failures? Who are the key people in their life? And interestingly enough, after talking to dying people for long enough, I was struck by the fact that almost no one says, I wish I had made more money. Like, I only made it to a net worth of $500,000. I wish I made it to $1 million. And this is really a regret. No one says that. No one says, I wish I worked more nights or weekends. They tend to say some version of the same thing. It's, I really regret that I never had the energy, courage, or time to, and then they fill in the blank. And it's different from every person because some people are interested in writing a book and other people are interested in playing a sport. And some people are interested in whatever it may be. The point is it's different for all of us, but there are these things that are important in our life and we often put them off. And a lot of times we say, well, we don't have enough time, or we say we don't have enough money. But what I think it comes down to, a lot of times we don't have enough courage. It is scary to pursue the things that deeply fill you up. It reminds us that life is finite and that we may die one day and not get there. And instead of doing that, it's much easier to concentrate on things like your job. Like, once I get to that promotion, everything's going to be good. Or your net worth. Once I get this much money in the bank, everything's going to be good. I know many, many, many people who got to that promotion and got to that bank account statement that they were looking for, and yet it didn't really solve their issues. And so I think what we can take from this is that there are probably things that are deeply important to us that we are not addressing in our lives. And we can wait until we're forced to think about them when we're on our deathbed and you see a doctor like me walking into your room. But I'd really encourage you to start thinking about those things earlier. And then we can take our job and our money and all those things and put them in their proper place. We can start thinking about things like purpose, identity, and connections, those things that fill us up. And then we can build financial frameworks around them. Money is a tool. It's not really a goal. Our goal is to find that version of happiness, connectedness, those things that fill us up, and fill more of our time with it.
What I love that you talk about in Taking Stock is that money can fuel our purpose. And you share something very pointed that I've had to reflect on a lot, because I have lots of interesting dramatic thoughts about money, but that one can really sort of examine, and you encourage us to examine, if you're afraid of having too much at the end of your life, like meaning like you haven't spent it yet, or of course the opposite, not enough. There's something to examine there. Can you unpack that a little bit? Just our relationship to either stockpiling it or spending it immediately. What is the approach to take?
So the book Taking Stock is based on three main premises. The first is that we should be putting purpose, identity, connections first. The second is there's ways to build a life of financial independence, and it talks about how you get there. And the last premise is asking yourself a question: what scares you the most? And the question is, am I more scared of dying young and wealthy, or living to be old and going broke? And the reason why this is a really important question is there is a tension that we all face every day. Do we spend money now on something that fills us up, something that's exciting, an experience, a thing, whatever it is? So do we spend money now? I call that YOLO, right? You only live once. Let's use it while we have it. Versus do I defer gratification? Like, I could live to an old age and I need to have money and I need to save for retirement. And so if we knew exactly when we were going to die, if someone said you're going to die in 30 years, 5 months, 6 days, 3 hours, and 7 seconds, you could then start looking at your financial trajectory and start planning out so that you had exactly zero at the time you died, or whatever you want to leave to your family and friends. The problem is we don't know that. And so the best we have is to ask ourselves that question: what scares us most? Because then we can look at this continuum of YOLO versus deferred gratification and start working on it. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you're afraid that you're going to die young and wealthy, then you should probably take whatever extra money you have and you're going to put away a small percentage of it, let's say 10 or 15%. And the rest you should really use for today. You should use it to live out your gifts, to help the people you want to help, to do the things you want to do. And if you're right and you die young, then you really use that money for good. If you're wrong and you live to an old age, well, you're still using that money for good. You're saving less, so you might have to work a little longer. But since you're doing all these things that light you up, you probably don't mind working longer because you're living a pretty good life. Now, turn that around. And let's say the other side is, let's say you're much more afraid of dying old and broke and you're a little bit less worried about dying young and wealthy. Then you probably want to take a little bit of your extra money and put it towards living for today and putting it into those things you care about. And then the rest of it, you want to put towards savings that you can use later on in your life. And so I think that question really helps frame this decision of, do I spend today or save for tomorrow?
There is in my audience, people would probably know the name Tom Monahan. So he's a fairly well-known Catholic philanthropist. He founded Domino's Pizza. At one point, he was the owner, if I'm not mistaken, of the Detroit Tigers. And then he eventually sold Tigers, sold Domino's, and wanted to invest his wealth in creating a Catholic university, Ave Maria, and the town that surrounded it. He had this incredible vision of a school, but literally a town. So he went into it was tomato fields, and he went into partnership with the county there to build a town, because they had this incredible vision of a community, like families that could support these students who were doing their undergraduate studies. And I had the fortunate experience to live there for several years in Ave Maria, Florida. But he has famously said, now I'll be honest, this is a bit anecdotal, I don't know where he said this, but if I'm not mistaken, he has said that he wants to die, like he's in his 80s, he has said that he wants to die with nothing in the bank, because he wants to have all of it. And it's an incredible example of using it for good. And so tell us about the purpose code. What was the impetus? You shared a little bit, and you read in the book that you would go and you would speak about finance and speak about purpose, and people would come to you after and be like, I'm angry at you because you keep talking about purpose and fueling, money fueling your purpose, but like, what happens if you don't know your purpose? So what inspired you to write this book?
So after having enough of these people pretty much tell me that they didn't want to talk about purpose at all, I went to the data, right? I'm a scientist, I'm a physician, and I knew there was data out there about how important purpose was. So I went to the data and I found really lots and lots of data that shows that purpose, having a sense of purpose in life, is associated with health, happiness, and longevity. The problem, though, is I found that other studies show that up to 91% of people at some point in their life have something called purpose anxiety. This idea that finding purpose makes them feel frustrated and depressed and anxious. And so to me, that was a paradox. How can it be the most important thing, but also be anxiety ridden? And so I wrote this book to help people see that purpose is probably not one thing, but two things. And one of them is probably more associated with anxiety, and the other is probably more associated with the health, happiness, and longevity. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to give people a framework to think about purpose in such a way that it was abundant and easy, and they could follow a series of steps to start building that in their life with the goal of that helping them feel more happy. And so that's what drove me to write the book.
And there's a study that you share in the book about happiness, and tell us a little bit about it. That there hasn't been too much study on this, if I'm not mistaken, but you did share something that college students who feel like they've got a sense of purpose, that there's an impact on it. If you recall the study I'm talking about, share us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, they found these kids had less depression, more happiness, more drive to do things at college and in their life. And there are tons of studies about happiness, and this is really interesting. There are tons of studies about happiness. We've studied wealth and happiness. We've studied all sorts of things. And the truth is, most of the time, we don't find the greatest correlations. But the Harvard Adult Developmental Health Study was a study started in the 1930s. They took a bunch of Harvard students and they interviewed them every 2 years. And if they think they started with like 700 of them, and then they brought in a few thousand members of their families, and then they brought in some controls from the greater Boston area. And over 70 or 80 years, they started with questionnaires. They eventually did blood tests. Eventually, as technology got better, they did MRIs and EEGs. And they set out to answer one big question: is what makes people happy? And after 80 years of studying these people, they found that it wasn't money, it wasn't position, it wasn't achievements, and it wasn't even purpose. And I'll explain this in a moment. What they actually found makes people most happy is interpersonal connections. Interpersonal connections. It is your connections in your community which ultimately brings happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I said it wasn't purpose, and I just wrote this whole book about purpose and just told you that purpose was associated with health, happiness, and longevity. Well, if you are a fan of what I call little p purpose, remember I said there are two types of purpose, big P and little p. Big P is goal-oriented. It's usually audacious, very hard to achieve, and usually leaves us frustrated and anxious. That's one type. Little p purpose is process-oriented. That means doing things that light us up regardless of the goal. It's very abundant, very easy, no way to fail. If you pursue little p purpose, a happy side effect is it connects you to other people. When you do things that light you up, other people see you lit up, and like a moth to a flame, they're attracted to you. They want to collaborate with you. If they have something to teach you, they want to teach you. If they have something to learn from you, they want to be your student. And this is where we get those deeper connections. And that's what I ultimately think leads to happiness. And so happiness is about people. And the way we get there often is through what I call little p purposes, doing things that light us up.
Mm. So I want to tell you a very quick story. I'm a mindset and a business coach. And in 2022, I ran a workshop. Actually, it was 21, the end of 21. I called it just a strategic planning workshop. And it's something that I have recorded that's in a portal that my, Wealth Without Guilt Academy students all have access to. And I encourage them to go through this workshop every single year. But it was very big P purpose driven. So like I lead people through an exercise. Like, I want you to picture yourself at the end of this year. What do you want in the bank? What do you want to have accomplished? Very big P purpose. And the example that I gave was I wanted to make $1 million in 2022. And I just took my community through the exercise again, but I was like, okay, just 2022 Lisa Canning had not been through all the things that 2025 Lisa Canning has been through. So I need you to hear me say this. And I quoted your book about little p. What if instead, like, you can still have that goal because it gives you a direction, right?
Yeah,
like
nothing wrong with goals. Yeah.
Nothing wrong. If you want to write a book, you kind of have to have some activities that, the book isn't going to come out of thin air, right? But I was like, what if instead we made it all little p purpose? And it's, what are the activities that every single day light you up and bring you joy, and you know you can do, like, all day, every day, without getting tired, without, I'm all into so many different personality assessments. My favorite one is one called the Motivation Code, and it takes your personal stories and it brings from that. It's the only quiz of its kind that I've seen that isn't just purely like A B C D E. Like, you actually have to write personal narrative, and then it extracts from your personal narrative your motivations. Anyway, I share all this that the small p purpose can look so different for everybody, but it's very important. It also allows for, as you share in the book, space for pivots. And
Yeah.
and I think that's very important, because when you are so grasped tightly to, I'm going to make $1 million. That was my 2022 goal. I did not make $1 million, but
Yeah.
that was
And how did you feel, by the way? So I love to really explore this, because here's my belief. When you make a big P purpose, like I want to make $1 million in a year, it's very much all or nothing.
yep.
It's very difficult to achieve, right? You got to be the right person at the right time, saying the right things. You got to have the right amount of luck and maybe even good genetics. And
Yeah.
the truth is, not everyone can do that. So there's going to be a huge number of people who fail at doing that. The question is, how does that make you feel? And when you find that you're not meeting that goal, do you start doing things you don't even like doing to fulfill that sense of purpose? You're like, well, I want my business to do really well, and I hate making TikTok videos and Instagram videos, but if I really want to sell this product, I'm going to have to make these TikTok and Instagram videos. So what you find is that you don't enjoy 80 to 85% of your time getting to this goal. And so you either fail at the goal and then just feel horrible. But even if you succeed, a lot of times you're like, okay, what now? Well, now I'm going to double down. So if I made $1 million this year, I want to make 2 million next year. And so then you go back to doing all sorts of things you don't like doing in service of that goal again. And so you're kind of spending most of your time doing things you don't enjoy that don't light you up. And so my bet is, when you set that as a goal, you probably felt a little bit down and bad at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Like, I'm hitting my head against the wall and I'm not getting where I want to go.
Yeah, and this particular one, because this is a fresh experience. I just did this past Monday. Like this is a fresh experience, looking back on something that was a very different version of Lisa Canning. Um, it made me feel like, well, why am I trying so hard in my business if I'm
Yeah.
not meet my goal?
Burnout.
Total.
Burnout.
But it also forced me to examine, and again, this is very fresh. It forced me to examine, well, why did I even set that goal to begin with?
Because you co-opted someone else's version of purpose.
100%.
Instagram, TikTok, marketing. Someone told you that what success looks like is 6-pack abs or a 7-figure business or traveling the world or wearing the nicest clothes. And because a lot of us have a purpose vacuum, right? We're like, well, I don't know what purpose is. I don't know how to find it. It's really easy to co-opt someone else's version of purpose. Here's the problem. A lot of times those TikTok influencers who are telling you should be making $1 million a year, they're hoping you buy their course or follow them. I mean, they're basically trying to get you to buy something. Same with the marketers. Like when you see the TV ads and they show you all these visions of what success looks like, they're trying to get you to buy something. It's not meant to make you happy.
And here's where I've particularly, if you may indulge me for a moment, everybody, to talk about myself. But like I told this to my spiritual director this past week. I was like, the only goal I'm making for 2025 is to remain as close to the Lord as possible. Like literally, that's it. Because I believe that is what will allow me to hear his voice, to right order my life. And it's very interesting. I've had to do some examination around my own business, my own products. We're in an interesting time where a mom can make money online from her phone, but what are the consequences of that? Right? Like in my own life, I've been examining my own absolute attachment to this thing, like how much I'm on it. And again, the voices and the influences that are permeating my brain, my subconscious, like my sleeping, all the things. It's a lot of doing, like in a not healthy way. And I've been asking this question, what does it look like as a Catholic wife and mom of 10 kids to run an online business as a human being? Like, how can I be as human as possible in this pursuit while still making money, while still providing for my family, while still being able to pay my mortgage, all the things? What does that look like? And that's what we need to do in a digital age.
And here's, again, so I'm going to step outside of someone who is part of your religion and who ascribes very closely to your beliefs. I don't want to assume anything for you or all your listeners, but let me speak on the outside. I imagine an all-loving, all-knowing God probably is not set on this idea that you're going to make $1 million a year. I imagine that an all-knowing, all-loving God wants you to celebrate his reflection in you. And the way you would celebrate his reflection in you is doing things that light you up, that show your gifts, that connect you to other people and make the world a better place. And so that's all little p purpose. Like, so connect some of the religion point to the human point, some of the loving God to what I'm doing in my daily activities. When you do things that light you up, things you love in your business or in your life that help connect you to other people and make their lives better, you are reflecting that most pure, holy piece of you that reflects God, right? And so I imagine if there's an all-knowing, all-loving God, he wants you to reflect him in your daily life. And I think by doing things that light you up, you are bringing your specialness to the world. And I think that's a wonderful way to align your daily activities with your belief system and your time in church and your spiritual time. I think it's a way to connect the two very well.
Oh, you're just like, what's the word? Bomb to my soul. So nice. So let's talk about how you personally, I would love to, if you'll indulge me, how you personally began to see, like you were a doctor, or you are still a doctor. But then how did you start to see that your thoughts about things could also build a platform and make you some money? I'd love for you to just paint the picture of when did this become a personal platform and all the steps that happened in that.
So interestingly enough, I really think it was a happy side effect. So imagine there I am in 2014, 2015, I'm burning out in medicine. I'm realizing that I co-opted my father's version of purpose as a big P purpose to make up for the cosmic tragedy of his death, getting to the point where I realized that big P purpose was impossible to fill. I didn't feel any better, even though I became a doctor. It didn't make it better that he left me. And so I had to say, well, what does living a better purposeful life look like? And I remember going into my parents' attic, and my mom had kept a lot of my dad's notebooks, right? When he was a physician, and I went through some of his notebooks, and there he had laid out lovingly his notes on these lectures, and he wrote about the physiology and all the pathways. And I could even tell from his notes that there was this love and this interest in what he was doing. And I didn't have that. Like, it didn't light me up. So it became really clear, like, this thing that was my dad's sense of purpose probably wasn't mine. And so I wasn't worried about building a platform or even making a living. I kind of looked at my financials and eventually realized, okay, I can make a go at doing some other things and still be okay financially. I started asking the question, more importantly, what lights me up? And when I started thinking about what lights me up, I realized I'd always loved writing. I'd always loved public speaking. And I was now enthralled by this idea of finances because it was helping me get away from this thing I was burned out. So I started a blog and eventually a podcast. I never planned to make money and I never planned to change the world. I planned to do something that lights me up. Now, interestingly enough, as a physician, a lot of people would look at me and be like, oh, you're changing the world. You're helping people. And it is true. Like, I helped 500 to 1,000 people a year doing these physician-oriented activities. When I started doing things that lit me up, I started a blog and a podcast and wrote books. And eventually that podcast got to millions of people. Eventually those books got to thousands and thousands of people. And I started realizing that my impact was probably greater doing this than being a doctor. And that was a happy side effect. It wasn't a plan. It was that I started doing things that were deeply important to me. It also happened to make me some money, which was less important. But I could hear a lot of your listeners listening to me right now. They're saying, well, I want purpose too, but I'm worried that if I pursue purpose, I won't be able to make money. I'm going to have to stop doing my job. I'm going to have to stop doing things that make life livable. How do I do that? And I usually tell people, well, it's not that strict. So if you're doing a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 6 that doesn't light you up, you don't love your job, the first thing you can do is add some purposeful activities at other times. Maybe you're really busy. Maybe you're a busy mom. Maybe you don't get much time to yourself and you're a working mom, but maybe Sunday night for an hour, dad can take the kids and you can just do something that feels purposeful or joyful. That could be reading a novel. That could be going on a nice long walk. If you have things you want to build or create, that could be building and creating. When you start there, you then take that experience and you see if you can maybe bring it into the workspace. So I had a really good friend who was in corporate America, and she felt so about her job, but she needed her job. But you know what she loved? She loved to talk about women's place in corporate America. So she started a blog. She had all these ideas and thoughts, and she loved doing the research. So she started a blog. She did that for 6 months. And then she's like, you know what? This stuff's important. I'm going to offer some webinars to people at my work for free. I'm just going to do it. So she started doing that. 6 months later, her boss came to her and said, we've had such positive feedback. I only want you to do your job 50% of the time. The other 50%, I want you to create more of these webinars. So look what happened. She'd started on her own time doing something she really liked, but because it lit her up and was exciting, it drew other people to her and eventually became a way for her to generate some revenue and then subtract out part of her work life she didn't like. And so I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying it's going to happen right away, but when you start doing things that light you up, the world takes notice. So it might take some time, but you might be able to bring some of those things either into your work life, or maybe you'll start a side business as a side hustle and it'll start doing really well. And that'll give you some margin to stop doing things you don't like doing. The possibilities are endless, but you first got to say, what lights me up? And then you got to start building some activities around that.
What are some questions that people can ask themselves around what lights you up? Because I think it can be a very nebulous, like what's my purpose? What lights me up? It can seem overwhelming. So what are some questions that people can ask themselves?
So I always tell people you don't find purpose, you create it. In other words, it is an active process that you have to build upon. But it is true you have to find what those inklings or beckonings are. What are those things that light us up? I call those purpose anchors. They're things we can anchor purposeful activities around. And so there's some really, really easy ways to do this. First and foremost, I talk to people about regret all the time because I deal with dying patients. So I hear a lot of regrets from the dying. So if I told you, boy, you've got a week to live, what would you always regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? Well, guess what? You don't have a week to live. You have plenty more time to live, but that could become a purpose anchor. Turn that regret around. How can we build purposeful activities around that? I think that's a great way to start thinking about purpose anchors. I also think the joys of childhood is a great way to start thinking about purpose anchors. Start looking at what you enjoyed doing as a kid and see if you can bring that to your adult life. I loved baseball cards as a kid. I let go of that when I became a professional and started doing important things, but I could go back to my life of baseball cards and I could build some really fun activities around it. Here's another one, the art of subtraction. And this, let me tailor this to our audience here today. Let's talk about religion. Let's say that you have a series of religion or community-based activities that you do every year. Let's look at those community activities, those things you do, everything from, going to sermons to volunteering in the community to whatever it is. And let's have you write all those things out you do. And let's have you rank them 1 to 10, what you love the most and what you do because you should do it, but you don't love at all. And then let's use the art of subtraction. Get rid of those things you don't really like at all. And let's start building more of those things you really like. So what is it you like? Do you like teaching Sunday school? Well, maybe you should do more of that. Do you like going to services? Then maybe you should do more of that. Do you like volunteering at the community? Working in the soup kitchen? Maybe you should do that. So we subtract out what we don't like, but then we really glom on the things we do like, and those become purpose anchors. And last but not least, if none of that works, use the spaghetti method. Throw a bunch of things against the wall and see what sticks. Try things you don't normally try. Hang out with people you don't normally hang out with. And if you do something and it fills you up and lights you up that day, maybe you start building some purpose around that. So I think those are 3 or 4 really good ways to start thinking about how do I start getting in touch with what lights me up?
In my experience coaching Catholic moms, and I get a gamut of women who are very clear on their business goals and they have already found success. But then I do get quite a few who may be homeschooling or they're dabbling. Like this is the very first time they're trying something out. And an observation I have is there's a lot of fear. So much fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd be curious what you would say. And the fear is around a lot of things. Some of it is very warranted, right? They fear that they will lose out on something really important. Like they might be so distracted in their business that they're not there for their husband or their kids. The fear is sometimes, gosh, I can't even afford groceries right now. How can I afford to, spend any kind of resources on this particular business venture? So, what would you say to people who have a lot of fear of the unknown or the expense of pursuing their purpose?
So this is the line I take with a lot of my coaching clients, and I bet you do the same. Here's the problem about fear. If you are happy with your life as it stands today, then change nothing. But if you're looking at your life and saying something needs to change, I'm not quite living up to my expectations. If you want a different result, you're going to have to do something different. And here's the problem with doing something different. When you do something different, you are by nature stepping out of your comfort zone. And what happens when you step out of your comfort zone? You become uncomfortable. And so it is a given. If you want a different result, you're going to have to do something different. And doing something different is always going to be uncomfortable, which is going to engender fear. And so I would turn the story around a little bit and I would change the narrative. I am feeling fear because I'm embarking on something exciting and new, and it could change my life in a really positive way. And so this is not fear. This is excitement. This is butterflies. This is me amping myself up to do the hard work of changing. And I think that's what we need to do. There's always going to be an excuse. There's always going to be that there's not enough money. But the truth of the matter is money is one tool in pursuing purpose, but we have others. We have our youth, we have our energy, we have our communities, we have our connections. We have all sorts of ways that we can pursue purpose even when we don't have money. So I don't believe money is a good excuse. Then people say, well, I don't have time. Well, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does the American Time Survey every few years, and they found that your average American has about 5 hours of free time. And in fact, people who are in more economically dire situations actually have a slightly bit more free time. So saying you don't have enough free time, at least, is not the average person. And so it's not time and it's not money. It probably is courage or fear. So yeah, we have to address that. Like if you want to change your life, you're going to have to change something.
If the purpose code was like the most successful it could ever be. So like, let's just fast forward 50 years. This has become like a wildly successful book. How does the world look different?
So what we're really talking about is happiness. And so right now, we have people who are unhappy at work. They're unhappy with their position in the world. They're unhappy with all sorts of things going on. What the world looks like is people who understand the concept of meaning and purpose a little bit better and then use them to create a more happy life. And so that's what I think that's where I think we are, is this is a journey to happiness. And a lot of the times happiness feels ephemeral or difficult or complicated, feels like maybe it's a momentary feeling and isn't even real. And so people call happiness all sorts of things. Some people call it, look at Maslow's pyramid, say it's self-actualization. Some people call it contentment. The point is, we're not going to be happy all the time, but we want to pursue lives that feel deep and healthy and connected. We want to connect with those other people and build communities. And so if I could give people the keys that unlock the paradox to help them understand that purpose actually can be nurturing and give them this enduring sense of happiness and legacy, that's what I hope the book does.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Of course.
Do you feel like life is deep and connected and happy right now?
Very much so. I mean, I look at myself compared to like 2018 when I really started this journey majorly, and I feel so much more connected. I have better friends. I spend almost all my time doing things that light me up, that I enjoy. And most importantly, when I look at my calendar every week, almost everything is something I put there and I can get rid of almost any of it. And so that feels a lot like freedom and happiness. But I didn't get there until I started to do these things that deeply lit me up. Now, I won't lie to you. That doesn't mean there isn't hardship. Like I had a family member die a few weeks ago. My kids have stresses, right? There are all sorts of things that get in the way. We're doing a house remodel, which has been really stressful. So it's not that I have a complete lack of stress. Mm-hmm. But in general, the things I have agency or control over, I've kind of taken those steps. Like, God forbid, if I died tomorrow or the next day, I could pretty much clearly say I've kind of done all the important things, right? Like I've done those things that were deeply important to me because I've thought about them and then I've kind of pursued a life based on those. And I think that's what we want, right? I think we want two things, right? We want to not have regret when we die. And then we want to have some version of impact and legacy. We want a piece of us to go on even after we're gone. And again, I think a great way to get there is little p purpose. When we do things that light us up, we tend to change the people around us. And that tends to be the piece we leave even once we've left this earth.
That's what I really want people to, I think, cling to. And I almost, repent is too strong a word, but if I could go back and coach some of the people that I coached in beginning of my coaching career, I was extremely focused on goals. And again, goals are fine. But what I really want people to hear in this conversation, it's the people you're impacting in the pursuit of that goal that is so widely important and will produce happiness, like we're saying.
And the best way to impact other people is not to go out and try to impact other people. The best way to impact other people is to do things that deeply light you up and bring your gifts to the world. And that, as a happy side effect, will change the world.
Is there anything else that you want to share today about the Purpose Code that you haven't had a chance to say?
Yeah. Purpose is easy and abundant. It's just no one has really given us the best script for it. And that was my plan with the Purpose Code, is to give you a very clear script on what building a life of purpose looks like. And I'm here to tell you, it is not horrendously hard. It is not scarce. It's abundant, and you can do it.
Where can people go to learn more about you, Doc G?
Easiest place is to go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can see links to buying both of my books, Taking Stock, as well as the Purpose Code, and see where I create most of my content nowadays. That is mostly on the Earn and Invest podcast and on the Purpose Code Substack.
So fun. Everybody go and read the Purpose Code. Go find Taking Stock. These are excellent books to give you some very practical, frameworks around money, legacy, purpose, and living a life of meaning. Thank you so much, Dr. Jordan. It's such a pleasure to have you. And everybody, we will see you next time on The Possibility.
See you later.